Hello, I'm Michael Dougherty, Michael Brendan Dougherty, and I'm here with Travis. Travis, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Travis Waldron. I'm sports reporter at Think Progress.
Hey, and I am the editor of the Slurve, which is the daily during the season newsletter on baseball, and recently named senior correspondent at the Week, which I'm pretty excited about. But we're here this week on the Score to talk a little bit about what's going on. Last week was the election to the Hall of Fame, where we had Greg Maddux, Thomas Glavine, or Tom Glavine, and Frank Thomas elected, and many others not elected, including Mike Piazza, Barry Bonds, Mark McGwire, a whole host of people that are suspected of steroid use. And we had, for the second or third year in a row, we had a lot of acrimony in that world about what's in the voters' heads. The voters are members of the Baseball Writers Association of America. And, some of them come out and explain their ballots. I mean, one voter for MLB.com said he just wasn't going to vote for anyone in the steroid era, whether they were suspected or not. So he only voted for Jack Morris. And then a few other reporters around the country kind of explained their ballots. But Travis, I just want to ask, what were you thinking as you're watching the results come in and watching some of the explanations and the acrimony about it?
I wrote, and I think my main thing is I've never been a huge Hall of Fame junkie, and now I'm kind of over it altogether.
Okay.
The arguing, everything around it is just kind of annoying, and I think that first to state my position, I would without question vote for Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens and Mike Piazza and all of them. I think my view of the Hall of Fame is that it is there to tell a little bit of a story of baseball, and without those guys, it doesn't do it. And we can't pretend that era doesn't exist. And aside from that, we don't know. What did steroids make Barry Bonds? What didn't? Was Barry Bonds a Hall of Famer before he ever used steroids? Was he not? I don't know. I'm just not particularly interested in having that debate anymore. If the Baseball Writers Association or enough members of it have determined that that's not what they want the Hall of Fame to be, that they don't want to include those players, okay. I'm not going to lose sleep over that. I think it's wrong. I disagree with it. I think they have some legitimate points. I'm just not going to really waste time thinking about it anymore, because it doesn't strike me as a particularly productive debate. It got to the point this year, I think, where it's really just a lot of people firing shots back and forth at one another, even though there are, legitimate disagreements there, which I understand, and okay with that. And I'm okay if the Hall of Fame doesn't remember it. And I'm going to devote all of that energy and time to other things in baseball, other improvements in baseball, and just liking the game. And that's enough for me.
Right.
It's not that I think people should stop debating it. It's not that I, don't have an opinion about it anymore. It just doesn't strike me as something that I really want to spend a lot of time engaging in. That said, I'm really happy as someone who grew up a Braves fan to see that Tom Glavine and Greg Maddux and Bobby Cox are all going to go into the Hall of Fame together. I think it's really cool.
That is a really cool thing, and actually, I wish that was just the story. I kind of wish that. My personal wish is that the voters were more liberal about who they let in, just a little bit. I think I'm one of the people that thinks the standards are just a little too stringent and stringently applied, especially when there are a few players like Phil Rizzuto or others that are like in the Hall of Fame but don't have the Hall of Fame numbers.
Right.
I actually do think personality counts. I think innovation counts. So I would, I would probably fill out a full ballot every year.
Right.
I would
agree with you on that.
I actually, I think Fred McGriff is a Hall of Famer. Anyway, but it's an interesting thing. There are a lot of theories, right? Deadspin and others have kind of jeered the what they see as just the moral preening of the baseball writers, and it's very easy to take shots like, okay, so you're mad at Mark McGwire for injecting steroids into himself, but all the things that Ty Cobb did and all the things that he was, you're okay. That passes the moral clause. There's a little moral clause in it that is suggested to Hall of Fame voters. It talks about their numbers, their achievements, their importance to the game, and also kind of their good citizenship in the game. So I understand that there is a suggestion to the voters to take good citizenship into account. I differ from you. I hate the Hall of Fame debate as much as you do. In a lot of ways, I want it to end, and I think the only way to end it is to let these guys in. But the Hall of Fame is important to me. I live in New York. I visited the Hall of Fame, maybe a half dozen times. The Hall of Fame and Baseball Museum in Cooperstown, maybe a half dozen times as a kid. And listen, the numbers of people that go to the Hall of Fame each year vary, right? It's 250 to 400,000 over the past couple of decades. That's the number of people that go per year. And the Hall of Fame itself is actually just literally that. It's a hall with all these very similar bronze-looking plaques that have a few details about the players that were elected. And then the museum, which is great, has all these artifacts and Clemens and Bonds and all these players that are from the steroid era. They're represented in the museum, right? So it's not there, but I do think reputationally for the Hall, it's important to include the current, the 80s and 90s and 2000s.
Well, and I think that's especially important because of what you said. The last point you made, I think these are connected. If we're the Hall of Fame, I think it was Fangraphs had a post right before the induction about the fact that we're already being more stringent than we've ever been. We're already inducting fewer players now than we've ever been, which has created this logjam on the ballot of where, this year you could argue that there were 13 or 14 guys who should be in there. I mean, for my money, Tim Raines should have been in there a long time ago. Craig Biggio should have been in there already.
Alan Trammell, maybe. You could argue for Alan Trammell. You could argue for several guys that are really, really far down on the ballot now.
Right. So the combination of we're already being more stringent that with players who we've deemed legitimate, and we're also going to exclude the players who we've decided by whatever measure are illegitimate or suspected of being illegitimate. Are we just going to not really have the late 80s to early 2000s in the Hall of Fame? It seems odd to me. And the one thing that really kind of perturbs me about this debate is like this idea that that period of baseball wasn't good. It was fun.
It was great.
We found out later that it was tainted by a lot of drug use and a lot of records that maybe weren't broken legitimately. But I mean, the post-strike to Barry Bonds breaks the record in 2001 era of baseball was amazing. Yeah. And, the summer of 1998 was phenomenal. And looking back on it, it's not nearly as fun to think about as it was then. But to me, to just pretend that none of that happened isn't just isn't just foolhardy, it's also a little bit disingenuous.
Do you think there's a generational element that many of the baseball writers are boomers, and in a way, by sticking the knife in the 90s, they're protecting the 50s and 60s, or they're further sanctifying them? Because there's, baseball writers kind of make their money, right? Not just writing columns, but occasionally writing books, right? And the big market was always for books about Mantle, about Ruth, which is going back to an even earlier age. But, that Mantle, DiMaggio, Murderers Row era Yankees, Jackie Robinson, Dodgers, Willie Mays, there was, this assumed that this was the golden era, and it's very much a boomers, it's been a mission of the boomer baseball writers to kind of hold this era above all others, and a lot of money's been made out of it. And I often wonder if, there isn't just an element of, it works for us too. I think you and I might be protecting our era of baseball. We fell in love with the game watching, Frank Thomas, and no one suspects Frank Thomas of doing drugs because he spoke out against them. Right? He was kind of one of the more vocal players in the 90s. Mm-hmm. And people actually even wonder if that's why he got elected on the first try, right?
Oh, I think
he
it's
was
definitely
outspoken against
definitely.
Them. Whereas a guy like Mike Piazza, who's clearly a Hall of Famer, right? His numbers would justify it even if he was a first baseman. But as a catcher, it's way over the top. He's the best. Right.
Right. I mean, he's maybe the best offensive catcher.
We suspect the baseball writers suspect he used because he wasn't named in any reports, but because other reporters said, "Oh, he had back acne," and there were Murray Chas seen back acne, and
so
there are rumors, right? And there have always been weird rumors about Mike Piazza, rumors that he did drugs, rumors that he was homosexual, all kind of unproven so far,
right?
But for me, because there were no tests, there's no baseball doesn't have a warehouse of urine from the 1990s, right? It's either that can be re-examined and that you could find out exactly who took what. I just don't think, I don't think the writers guessing and then using the Hall of Fame as their form of punishment works. And actually, this is something I think that we should acknowledge. Younger fans and younger sports writing guys like you and I, we're a little bit out of the mainstream of opinion, right? The average fan thinks, hey, these guys shouldn't make it. Freddie DeBoer calls them, John Q. moron, or, whatever. And he'll say that, this guy wants to see cheaters punished. And, you might even construct an elaborate theory of hey, the 90s and the 2000s were years when cheaters prospered, not just in baseball, but in the economy and in American life generally, in politics and in political punditry, whatever. And so there's just this, John Q, I'll call him John Q. Lunch Bucket, wants to punish these guys. And I agree with his instinct. I just don't think the Hall of Fame is the appropriate or very... listen, denying someone entrance in the Hall of Fame is a big deal. It means a lot to these guys, and it can be a financial boon to them as well, because, their autograph is worth more, their appearances are worth more. But I just still think it's the cost to our history and the cost of the way we understand sports is too high.
I agree with that. And you know, I think the funny thing about this debate to me is that you almost get painted into this idea that, well, if you think Barry Bonds should be in the Hall of Fame or anything else, then you don't care about the fact that people are cheating. And, you know, it's just not that simple to me. I mean, my biggest problem with the whole thing is, you know, I actually understand a little bit if people don't want to vote for Bonds or Clemens because they're, you know, there's actually some pretty substantial links to drugs for them. But then when it trickles down to, you know, Jeff Bagwell and Mike Piazza and Craig Biggio but Frank Thomas gets in and Ken Griffey Jr. is probably going to get in. I mean, I assume Ken Griffey Jr. is going to walk into the Hall of Fame. How do we really know that one of those guys, because he looks like he used drugs, or we think he might have used drugs, or some reporter saw acne on his back, so he definitely used drugs? Whereas, you know, Ken Griffey Jr. never. You know, why would Ken Griffey Jr. ever use drugs? I mean, not that, but and I don't want to like go around witch hunting these guys, and I think that's the reason is that. It's not that I want to find out if Ken Griffey Jr. used drugs or hold everybody under suspicion. It's quite the opposite. The 90s happened. A lot of these guys were using. A lot of them weren't. Some of them were legitimately good baseball players without it. And I just don't want to spend all day, every time, every year the Hall of Fame ballot comes up debating the scant evidence on every player and whether they use drugs. It just doesn't, you know, I agree with you that the Hall of Fame is just not the vehicle for that discussion. And, you know, to my larger point that I made before is me personally, I would rather use all of that energy, you know, talking about how to improve baseball going forward when it comes to drugs. But, you know, I understand a lot of people really, really hold the Hall of Fame in high esteem, and they should. It's an institution that says a lot about the game of baseball, and you know, I've always been somewhat skeptical of it because I growing up in Louisville, you know, around a bajillion Reds fans, and never quite understanding why Pete Rose wasn't in the Hall of Fame. I think I've always been a little skeptical of it, and you know, this whole thing is just kind of an asinine debate to me. It just doesn't. I understand the legitimate differences. I just don't understand why there's so much energy into it.
Yeah, it is a weird. I mean, I think there's a lot of energy into it because there's kind of, you know. Listen, sports writers do have this problem that I think all writers on the internet have, which is just like produce content, get people interested, get people excited. So, you know, make your opinion really sharp and hard. And so there's this huge incentive to do that. But, you know, I don't think that's necessarily the best frame for looking at the Hall of Fame. And there's, you know, I can't say that the Hall of Fame vote is much worse now than it was previously. You know, Willie Mays was not unanimously elected to the Hall of Fame, right? Right. And the famous kind of reactionary New York tabloid sports writer Dick Young said, you know, these guys wouldn't vote for Jesus Christ if he came with his little baseball glove. You know, so there is like this element of that, and I don't know, like, do you think sports writers like look at their ballot and think like, hey, I'm going to be the one that makes sure that Greg Maddux doesn't get in unanimously. Like, I'm gonna make sure that even if everyone else votes for him, I'm leaving him off because, well, Willie Mays wasn't a first ballot guy, you know, or no one's been unanimous before. You know, I don't understand that, you know, that level of the psychology, right? Like, is that something you want? Like, to me, I would be almost ashamed of that on my deathbed. I would not be proud of that. You know, I was the jerk sports writer eating the free food in the clubhouse for years and years, and then I voted down this guy who was, given this incredible gift from the heavens to play a game I loved. Maybe that makes me a little bit too servile in front of the athlete, but it's how I feel. So, one thing I want to say about the Hall of Fame, I was alluding to it earlier. The Hall of Fame is this brick-and-mortar institution in Cooperstown, New York, right? And Cooperstown, have you ever been to Cooperstown? Okay, so Cooperstown is this, it's way out of the way. It is a gorgeous town, with tons of, great colonial architecture. It's kind of, idyllic looking in many ways. It's unfortunately economically not doing very well for a long time. There's kind of been this brain drain from those areas of New York going back for a long time. But, on a summer day, it's about 10 degrees cooler there than in New York City or near New York City. There are tons of little shops and institutions all throughout the town, restaurants named for players, little apparel shops, souvenir shops. There's the Hall of Fame itself. There's also a museum dedicated to James Fenimore Cooper, the American author of Last of the Mohicans and other things like that. And I care about this place. Having been there a couple of times, I care about the esteem this institution is held in, because I do think this museum and the Hall of Fame itself are worth going to, and they're definitely worth taking your kids to if you can. If you're within driving distance and you can make this a day trip, get up early in the morning, 6 a.m., drive up there, go into the hall, have lunch, go back in, see what else is in there. I mean, it's everything that baseball should want its Hall of Fame to be, right? Or you can't help feeling that Ken Burnsy amber glow of the history of the game. I mean, it's really well done. I think I've been to Canton and I've been to Springfield to see the football and basketball Hall of Fames, and nothing quite compares to Cooperstown. So I guess if any of the baseball writers are watching this or listening to it, I would just plead with them to think about that. That the Hall of Fame isn't just something in a history book. It's this actual place that people live around and work, and that, a whole town kind of revolves around. And just consider that when you're voting for these guys. Do you really want the kid who grew up rooting for Mike Piazza to feel like the Hall of Fame is the enemy of his baseball experience? I don't think he should.
Right. I think that's probably where I am too. And one of my favorite things about the game of baseball is that none of our sports care as much about what happened before.
Yeah.
And none of our sports,
right.
From a stats perspective, I mean, I think you can find that in the root of all of this performance-enhancing drug stuff is that, it's not that the guys are cheating that necessarily bothers people. It's that they're cheating the game. They're cheating, the guys who came before them and set these records. When you break Babe Ruth's record or Roger Maris's record, career records, Hank Aaron's home run record. I mean, this is the single most revered record in the game of baseball, and all of a sudden guys come along and smash it because they're using drugs. That isn't cheating that isn't it. It doesn't cheat anyone as much as it cheats the history of the game. And from that perspective, I think the Hall of Fame is very important because it does it is the structural home of the history of baseball. And I understand that. I really think that's important. All I'm saying is, if there's the Baseball Writers Association, and not all of their members, obviously, but if enough of their members have decided that that's not what they want the Hall of Fame to be, it's not something I'm going to lose a ton of sleep over. I hope that the people who really do care about that debate have it, and I hope that it turns out obviously the way that I see it, because I think it does matter a lot to the history and everything else. Just not my cup of tea, I guess.
Yeah, I guess, most people are never going to visit it, right? I mean, like I said, most baseball fans, if there are, 15 million baseball fans, like really engaged baseball fans in America, like I said, 200 and something thousand make it to the Hall of Fame a year. So it's not, and not all of the people that visited are fans, right? They're like being dragged there by their family. So it's just tough because this is interestingly what motivates people to talk about baseball, right? Like when people talk about football, when someone flips on sports radio, if they're talking about football and having a passionate discussion, they're talking about what's happening right now, right? And in baseball, if it's a passionate discussion, it's probably about comparing players, comparing eras, comparing teams from different eras. It's much more informed by the history. And I think, I don't know why, but it's just some sports are about to evolve constantly, like football. And the past is the past, and who cares, Like, that's nice. Take a look at it. But in others, I think baseball most prominently, maybe afterwards hockey. The history matters, and you tamper with it at your own risk. Speaking of tampering in baseball, I'm just interested in talking a little bit about the developments with Alex Rodriguez. So basically, MLB's arbitrator has shortened the punishment to all of next season, right? So Bud Selig set this number of punishment for Alex Rodriguez based on testimony by a steroid dealer, basically, for 212 games, which was all of the rest of last season and all of the 2014 season. The arbitrator has now, they fought it. Alex didn't serve any games yet while he appealed. The arbitrator determined, okay, we're going to get the result ultimately that Selig wanted, which was he's out of baseball for a year. And Alex is now going to sue in federal court. He's going to look for an injunction, arguing to the judge that, he can't recover this year of his baseball life later, right? It's athletic ability, rapidly declines after age 40. So it's not like 5 years from now, if the case in federal court goes his way, he can get this year back. And on top of it, Tony Bosch gave a long interview to 60 Minutes last night. And I just want to get your sense, where do we could talk about A-Rod and for all day, right? I mean, this is what sports talk radio lives on. But what do you think about how justice is proceeding here, within baseball or potentially outside of it? I mean, just what are your impressions?
So this is another one of those things where I'm going to get lumped in with people who don't care about steroids, I guess. But I find this whole thing very troubling for a lot of reasons. I think they're they're kind of on different lines of troubling reasons. I think one is Major League Baseball's investigation was questionable, and I think it's okay to admit that they probably had a lot of evidence against Alex Rodriguez and still question the methods by which they obtained that evidence and made their case. And nothing in the 60 Minutes thing last night changed my mind about that. The fact that they, paid off Anthony Bosch, paid for a lot of his security and, hotels and legal fees, and dropped their case against him.
Yeah.
That they paid for documents from other shady characters, I think is all very troubling. And the suspension is very troubling to me. I think that the fact that it started at 211 games, which that is not in the joint drug agreement. I know there's questions about, non-analytic positives when they don't have a test. And then, it was kind of a power grab for Bud Selig to say, let's see if I could do this. And then the arbitrator essentially said, sure, you can. Not for as long as you wanted to, but you can still I'll still hand down a penalty that also doesn't exist. I think that's troubling. I think it raises questions about the value of the drug agreement and where do we go from here on the drug agreement? Is this a precedent for dealing with future drug cases? Or is this a one-off because it's Alex Rodriguez and, baseball knew they could win the fight against him? Is it does the fact that you have a collectively bargained drug agreement matter going forward? If you're going to sidestep it in certain cases, then is there a purpose to having it? I think, that's an important question. The other area where I find it troubling is on the drug testing front in general. I think if Anthony Bosch is right that Alex Rodriguez passed at least 12 drug tests, and we know that A-Rod passed a large number of drug tests, whatever it might be. If Anthony Bosch is right that he was doing these drugs and never got caught, well, that's troubling to me too, to say that, it's not shocking. It's not news that, wealthy athletes can kind of buy drugs that are going to beat drug tests. But it does raise the question, I think, given that the majority of the guys linked to the biogenesis scandal were caught because of a newspaper investigation, not because of drug tests. I think it does raise questions about how many guys are out there doing this? How many guys are getting past these tests? And does the system we have in place actually foster the cleaner game that baseball says it does, that players say they want, that fans say they want? And I think that's going forward, those are questions that are going to need to be answered. And I thought that, it strikes me that not really anyone involved is particularly interested in those questions. I hope the union is interested in the fate of the drug agreement. I hope both sides are ready to talk about what needs to be done, not just as more tests and harsher suspensions. The 60 Minutes piece I thought could have asked those questions and didn't, and that worries me, because if we're just going to go forward like there aren't larger implications to this, then I think we're mistaken.
I think that was beautiful what you just said. I think you ran it through, and then you touched on something at the end that really interests me, which is the role of the players' union in this, which is largely absent, right? I mean, what's interesting is A-Rod basically gave up on union representation in this case extremely early. And it seems like there are reasons to believe the union gave up on giving A-Rod the full defense that they might have given other players, especially in the past. And I wonder if Bud Selig is testing the waters, I wonder too if the players' union is nervous that they don't have the support, the unconditional support of players, of their members for a player that they believe, that other players commonly believe is a drug cheat, right? I think, Joe Sheenan and others have asked, have noticed that a lot of baseball writers say, the culture in baseball is changing, and the drug cheats are no longer kind of dominant, and the anti-cheating players are kind of setting the tone for the league now. And Joe Sheenan asks, where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? I think the evidence may be in the union's total lack of vigor about this. Now, it could be that it's just a matter of union leadership feels that this is a bad hill for them to die on when they are looking in the future to the fact that teams and the league itself are creating new revenue streams, and that owners are taking a larger percentage of revenue off the table than in years past, that players would have clawed for themselves. I don't know, but I do think I think the interesting thing to watch is how does the union react next time that a major leaguer, a prominent one, gets under the spotlight. Because so far it just seems like they used to fight these cases too.
Well, they fought. I mean, under Marvin Miller, they fought the very idea that we would drug test. And perhaps, I mean...
The precious fluids of the athletes.
What's that?
The precious fluids of the athletes.
Well, and I mean, not to... I am not 100% anti-drug testing by any means, but I think there's a legit question here right now about, take away from the A-Rod case. If I'm a player, if I'm a baseball player, I'm thinking, so A-Rod passed at least a dozen tests. The arbitrator, or let's back up a second. A-Rod passed at least a dozen tests. Bud Selig reached across and basically said, I'm going to take this power for myself. An arbitrator basically handed him that power and said, you can do that. If I'm a player, I'm kind of sitting here thinking, is this drug agreement, is this the whole situation as it exists? Is it giving away more power and we're not getting the clean game in return? Or is Bud Selig using this? I'm not necessarily convinced the A-Rod argument that Bud Selig is using this to totally undermine collective bargaining and guaranteed contracts and all of that. But I do think it's indicative of that general lack of respect for the agreement and the fact that it was bargained. I mean, these punishments are supposed to be, the drug agreement was sort of kind of meant to take the discretion out of this. It was, this guy cheated, this is his penalty. This guy cheated again, here's a harsher penalty. This guy cheated again, well, now he's gone. It was supposed to be pretty concrete, and now we're basically seeing that it's not. And so I think that the union really needs to look at this and think, and talk to the players about this and say, yes, A-Rod's unpopular. Yes, I know a lot of you, the Mike Trouts, all these other guys who spoke up, that you want to get rid of these guys, and I understand that. But you also have to look at the larger implications of what this means. And, are harsher penalties and more tests going to get you there, or are they simply going to kind of lend even more help to an office, a front office that, just is kind of using this as, because if you become that unpopular player all of a sudden, and the front office goes at you outside of the agreement like this, I think that's something the players have to think about. And maybe they don't. Maybe what they want is, you fail a test and you're gone. I don't think that's a good policy, but if that's what the union decides and that's what the players say they want, I don't.
Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes the anti-steroid players can be shockingly harsh. I mean, I saw something like Ricky Henderson, retired baseball great, one of the greatest leadoff hitters ever. He wrote something like, over the weekend on his own Facebook page, something like, you've got to get rid of these guys. People think steroids doesn't make a difference, but Ryan Braun is like a middle-of-the-road player without them. Like Ricky Henderson's been a coach in the league, like a first base coach and other things. Like he has the chance to run into guys still. Unlike some of the other retired athletes who are kind of out of the game. So it is interesting to see what the player attitudes are and how they're this is an issue that I think cuts the union. I think it's and some people say like Bud is using this as a wedge issue. I think it is a wedge issue, but I do think you can make the case that Bud Selig sees this as potentially the big black mark on his legacy, the steroid era. And so he's going to try to do something about it before he leaves. I think you're right to just question the means of how this has gone about. There's nothing horribly alarming here. I mean, listen, they're not dropping players into Guantanamo Bay for 10 years. You know what I mean? And this is like, most of what we're talking about is private justice, right? This is a league that does have a, monopoly protection from the government, but in general, like, these are private employers coming up with punishments for players that are generally well compensated. And I think maybe one of the reasons that athletes might be acquiescing and the union might be weakening in some ways is that for the average player, baseball's never been so lucrative and so good, right? I mean, the minimum wage in baseball is really high compared to even other professional sports. And, revenue-wise, the league is generating a ton of money. It's good times. It's a good time to be a baseball player.
But that's something that concerns me about this, too. Go ahead. I'll let you finish. I'm sorry.
No, that's about it. That's my only point, is that there's a sense where, like, the players are kind of fat and happy.
Right.
They're not actually fat. But.
And I understand that. And, I wish Bud Selig sort of had that same view, because baseball's probably more lucrative for owners now than it ever has been.
Yeah. Definitely.
And, my big question on this is so the union last night with the 60 Minutes thing showed some signs of life, some real signs. With, they're criticizing on confidentiality, which I don't really know why that's the battle they want to fight. Strikes me as the lesser of importance than many of the issues here. But if the union does wake up on this and does view what Selig is doing, and that's possible because Tony Clark, who's the new union president, may have a total different view of this than Michael Weiner did. If they do kind of stand up and start to fight this, I think it's a worst case scenario. But if this poisons the well a little bit on the negotiations for the new collective bargaining agreement or a new drug agreement, both which they do drug agreement negotiations every year. They have a collective bargaining agreement that expires at the end of the 2016 season. If this affects that at all, if there's even the remote possibility that this whole fight could, jeopardize the 20 years of labor peace and the basic prosperity of the game, I just don't understand how it's going to be worth it. And I know that's a worst case scenario, and I know it there's a really good chance it won't do that. But I think that if it does, then was a year of A-Rod worth that? Was it worth putting basically the greatest period of baseball history financially and from a stability standpoint? Was it worth risking that? I don't see how the answer is anything but no.
No, and that's let's basically end there and say that there's a mirror here with America's drug war, right? Which is, you can show me that having laws against these, drug X, drug Y, drug Z deters a certain amount of people from ruining their lives by using these drugs. However, on the other side, what does it actually cost? Mm-hmm. What is this costing us? How many lives are we ruining in the process of helping those few? Is it really worth the cost to ruin someone's life over a few cases of marijuana possession? To basically turn them into a ward of the state, take away their voting right, imprison them, make them basically unemployable for years afterwards or for the rest of their life. What are the costs to this war? So Like, I want baseball to go after the cheaters. I think it's in the best interest of the game. I think it's in the best interest of the players, ultimately, to make it a clean game. Right? I think it's in the best interest of their health.
Right.
But they have to weigh the costs carefully of what are they doing to the game, what sort of achievements, which is labor peace since the mid-90s, are they about to sacrifice? It's in a way, it's like a careful issue of governance.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope they get it right. Listen, I think we should end here. But this has been great as usual, Travis, and we'll have you on soon. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, thanks, Travis.